I planned the perfect pregnancy surprise for my husband, then he admitted he'd been cheating with my sister right before I could tell him. Warren and I have been married for 5 years, and up until recently, I thought our marriage was solid. I truly believed we were doing great until, out of nowhere, he dropped a bombshell. He admitted he'd been having an affair. And not just with anyone, with my own sister. You see, we're both doctors, and while that might sound impressive or fulfilling to outsiders, it also comes with its fair share of challenges. The long hours, the emotional exhaustion from caring for patients, and the sheer dedication we pour into our work, it all adds layers of complexity to our relationship. We're both deeply passionate about what we do, and while that's a good thing, it hasn't always made our marriage easy. Balancing our demanding careers with our personal lives has been tough, and there have definitely been moments when the stress of it all weighed us down. But through everything, we stood by each other. He was my partner, my person. I never once doubted that we'd spend the rest of our lives together. In fact, just 2 months ago, I found out I was pregnant. When Warren and I first got married, we were eager to start a family. We tried for a long time, hoping and waiting, but no matter how much we wanted it, it just never happened. Eventually, we made peace with it. We stopped actively trying, telling ourselves that if it was meant to be, it would happen in its own time. Letting go of that dream wasn't easy, but we shifted our focus to our careers and our relationship, trusting that life would take its course. So when I started feeling nauseous in the mornings, pregnancy wasn't the first thing that crossed my mind. I figured it was just stress or something work-related, but just to be sure, I took a test. I wasn't expecting anything, really, I just wanted to rule it out. But when I saw that little plus sign, I was completely floored. It was an overwhelming moment, a mix of disbelief and excitement crashing over me all at once. After years of thinking it would never happen, there I was, staring at undeniable proof that I was going to have a baby. I had to sit down just to process it, to let the reality sink in. The first thought that popped into my head was Warren. I couldn't wait to tell him. I knew how much this would mean to him after everything we'd been through. But at the time, he was away at a series of medical conferences. This wasn't the kind of news you shared over a text or a quick phone call, it was too big, too important. I wanted to see his face, to be in the same room when I told him. So I decided to wait until he got back. The day he was supposed to return, I had everything planned out perfectly. I wanted it to be special. I made a reservation at our favorite restaurant, the place we always went for big moments, or even just when we needed a little time away from the chaos of our jobs. It was our spot, filled with years of memories. I could already picture the joy on his face when I told him, imagining how this would mark the beginning of an exciting new chapter for us. But when I picked him up from the airport, something felt off. The moment I saw him, I could tell something was wrong. He looked distracted, almost lost in thought. He didn't greet me the way he usually would, no warm hug, no smile, no light in his eyes at seeing me after time apart. He barely even said hello. The distance in his demeanor was impossible to ignore. I tried not to overthink it. Maybe he was just exhausted from traveling, or maybe the conference had been stressful. Hoping to cheer him up, I mentioned our lunch plans, thinking it would be a nice way for us to reconnect. But to my surprise, he let out an irritated sigh and said we should cancel. He just wanted to go home. His tone was sharp, almost annoyed at the idea of going out. His reaction caught me completely off guard. We didn't have any other plans, and I figured a quiet lunch together would be the perfect way for him to unwind. I tried reasoning with him, pointing out that since we'd probably end up ordering takeout anyway, we might as well enjoy a meal out first. He exhaled heavily, like I was asking too much of him, then gave me a curt nod. And just like that, he shut me out again, turning his attention back to his phone as I drove us to the restaurant. By the time we got there, the tension between us was thick. We took our seats, but Warren barely spoke. Wanting to break the silence, I asked him about the conference, hoping to spark some kind of conversation. But his answers were short, clipped, just one word here, a half-hearted nod there. It was so unlike him. Normally, after these trips, he'd be full of stories, talking about the people he met, the interesting lectures, the new ideas he'd picked up. But this time? Nothing. It felt like he was holding something back. To be fair, I had noticed a shift in his behavior over the past few weeks. He had been distant, withdrawn. I chalked it up to stress. Being a doctor takes a toll on you, after all. Our jobs push us to our limits, and I assumed this was just another rough patch. We'd been through them before. I kept telling myself that once the conference was over, once he had some time to decompress, things would go back to normal. But sitting across from him at lunch that day, watching him barely acknowledge me, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was seriously wrong. Still, I pushed my unease aside. I had been waiting long enough to tell him about the baby, and no matter what was weighing on him, I was desperate to share this news. I hoped that maybe, just maybe, hearing about the pregnancy would snap him out of whatever was bothering him. That this moment, this incredible, life-changing moment, would bring us back together. Just as I was summoning the courage to tell him, just as I was about to share the happiest news of our lives, Warren looked up from his plate. His voice was quiet, steady, almost too calm. And then he said the words that shattered my entire world. "I've been cheating on you." At first, I didn't even process what he had said. The restaurant was buzzing with conversation, the clinking of dishes, the hum of everyday life. For a brief moment, I thought I had misheard him. I let out a nervous laugh, almost instinctively, and asked, "What?" as if there had been some mistake, as if maybe he had meant to say something else. But then he looked me in the eyes, really looked at me for the first time that day, and repeated himself, this time with absolute clarity. His tone was flat, detached, completely devoid of emotion. "I've been sleeping with your sister." And just like that, the world stopped. A numbness spread over my face, my body. My husband, and my sister? Mallory, of all people? My sister. My own flesh and blood. My mind refused to accept what I had just heard. My lips parted as if to speak, but no words came out. I finally managed to ask, "What do you mean?" even though, deep down, I already knew. I just didn't want to believe it. I needed him to take it back, to tell me it was some cruel joke. But the look on his face told me everything. There was no regret, no sadness, no sign of the man I had loved and trusted for years. He just sat there, staring at me like he had just told me the weather, like this was nothing more than a mundane fact. Like none of it mattered. I felt the first sting of tears welling up in my eyes, the weight of betrayal settling deep in my chest. My voice shook as I forced myself to ask, "When did it start?" I don't even know why I asked. Maybe some desperate part of me was clinging to the hope that this was all some kind of misunderstanding. But he answered casually, without hesitation, as if he were telling a story that had nothing to do with the destruction of my life. He told me it had been going on for months. That it started after Mallory's last breakup. She had been devastated, leaning on us for support, spending more and more time at our house. I remembered those days so vividly, how I welcomed her in, wanting to be there for her, wanting to help her heal. She was my sister. Of course, I had wanted to take care of her. But while I had been offering her comfort, Warren had been offering her something else entirely. Looking back, I had never thought twice about how well they got along. If anything, I had found it comforting. It made me happy that my husband and my sister were close, that we all felt like a real family. Never in my worst nightmares had I imagined they were that close. That while I had been in the same house, completely oblivious, they had been sneaking around behind my back. The weight of it all, the depth of the betrayal, was too much. As Warren kept talking, trying to explain himself, my mind blurred. I couldn't listen to him anymore. My stomach twisted, and I thought I was going to be sick. Without thinking, I grabbed my keys from the table and stood up abruptly. I didn't care that we were in a crowded restaurant. I didn't care if people stared. I just needed to get out. Warren called after me, but I didn't stop. I walked straight to my car, my heart pounding, my hands shaking as I fumbled with the door. And then, as I started driving, my phone began ringing. It was him, of course. Over and over. But not to apologize. Not to explain. No, he was calling to scold me. To scold me. For embarrassing him. For abandoning him at the restaurant. For overreacting. Something inside me snapped. I gripped the steering wheel with one hand, grabbed my phone with the other, and screamed into it, "Get an Uber and leave me the hell alone," before hanging up. I could barely see the road through my tears as I drove home, my mind racing, my heart completely shattered. The moment I stepped inside the house, I locked myself in our bedroom. And that's when I finally broke. Sobbing so hard I could barely breathe. The kind of crying that leaves you gasping, shaking, unable to do anything but curl into yourself and let the pain consume you. I couldn't believe this was real. My husband, the man I had built my life with. My sister, the person I had trusted more than anyone. How could they do this to me? I don't know how long I cried. Eventually, exhaustion took over, and at some point, I must have passed out. When I woke up, it was past midnight. The house was eerily quiet. The knocking had stopped. Hesitantly, I got out of bed. My body felt heavy, drained. I hadn't eaten all day, and despite everything, hunger gnawed at my stomach. So I made my way downstairs. That's when I saw him. Warren was asleep on the couch, his phone resting on the table beside him. The sight of him lying there, so at peace, so undisturbed, made my blood boil. How could he sleep so easily after what he had done? I stood there for a long moment, fists clenched, my body trembling with anger and disbelief. And then, without even thinking, my eyes drifted to his phone. I had never done this before. Not once in our entire marriage. But that night, for the first time, I unlocked it. He hadn't even bothered to change his passcode. The same one he had always used. That's how confident he was. How sure he was that I would never suspect him. That I would never doubt him. Oh, what a fool I had been. As I started scrolling through his messages with Mallory, my heart pounded. I didn't want to see what was there, but I needed to know. I needed the full truth. And then I found them. The photos. One after another. Inappropriate, explicit, sickening. Pictures of my husband and my own sister, teasing each other, laughing, planning their secret meetings. There were hotel reservations. Conversations about how thrilling it was to sneak around behind my back. And then, the message that broke me completely. Mallory had texted him about how exciting it was, how the risk of getting caught made the sex even better. She had even joked that the betrayal made it more fun. I stared at the screen, my hands shaking so badly I could barely hold the phone. This wasn't just an affair. This wasn't just a mistake. This was cruel. Calculated. And my own sister had reveled in it. The man I had trusted with my life, the woman I had grown up with, both of them had thrown me away like I was nothing. And as I stood there, gripping Warren's phone, staring at the undeniable proof of their betrayal, one thought burned through my mind. I would never forgive them for this. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold my phone steady, but I forced myself to take pictures of the messages. I needed proof of everything I had just seen, of every disgusting betrayal they had committed behind my back. Once I had what I needed, I slipped my phone into my pocket and quietly made my way upstairs. I didn't hesitate. I couldn't stay in that house, not with him. I wasn't going to raise my child under the same roof as a man who had shattered my trust so completely. With every bit of strength I had left, I pulled out a bag and started packing. Just the essentials. My hands trembled as I stuffed clothes into the suitcase, my heart hammering so hard I could hear it in my ears. I kept telling myself to hold it together, to just get out. As soon as I was done, I grabbed my bag, walked out of the house without a second glance, and drove straight to my parents' home a town over. When I showed up at their door in the middle of the night, they were understandably surprised. But I couldn't bring myself to explain, not yet. My voice felt trapped in my throat. All I could manage to say was that I needed to stay with them for a while. And thankfully, they didn't press me for answers. They just let me in. That night, I curled up in the bed I had grown up in, surrounded by the familiarity of my childhood home, and tried to process everything. But no matter how much I replayed it in my mind, it still didn't feel real. It's been weeks now. I'm still staying with my parents, and yes, I'm already going through the process of divorcing Warren. There's no second guessing it. There's no going back after what he's done. I wasted no time in filing. My parents, furious beyond words, cut Mallory off the moment they found out. She's no longer welcome in our family. They're ashamed of what she's done, disgusted by her betrayal, and as far as they're concerned, she doesn't exist to them anymore. Mallory, of course, has called me over and over, begging for forgiveness. She keeps saying it was a mistake, that she regrets everything. But I don't know if I'll ever be able to forgive her. I don't even know if I want to. Ironically, the most support I've received has come from Warren's own family. The moment they found out about his affair, they made it very clear that they wanted nothing to do with it. They're disgusted with him, ashamed of the son they raised. They told him outright that they would never accept Mallory as part of their family. It's like they finally see him for who he really is, and they're not even trying to hide their disappointment. For weeks, I kept my pregnancy a secret from Warren, from his family, from everyone but my parents. It just didn't seem right to share such wonderful news in the middle of so much destruction. But 2 weeks ago, after returning from my ultrasound appointment and sitting down with my parents, I realized I couldn't keep it to myself any longer. I braced myself for a difficult conversation when I finally met with Warren. I knew it wouldn't be easy. But nothing could have prepared me for just how cruel his reaction would be. The first words out of his mouth weren't shock, or concern, or even the slightest bit of happiness. No. He accused me of baby trapping him. He sneered at me, claiming I had done this on purpose, that I was trying to manipulate him into staying with me out of jealousy for my sister. His words cut deep. Then he said something that nearly made me lose control. With a cold, emotionless stare, he told me he wished I would miscarry. He said he didn't want this baby. He looked me dead in the eye, completely indifferent, as if what he was saying wasn't the most vile thing a person could say to the mother of their child. And then he made himself crystal clear, if I kept the baby, he wanted nothing to do with me or our child. I was shaking with rage. In that moment, if I hadn't been pregnant, I swear I would have punched him in the face without thinking twice. But I had to keep it together. Not for him. Not for me. But for the baby, the innocent life caught in the middle of this disaster. I took a deep breath, forced my voice to stay calm, and told him straight to his face, I wasn't trying to trap him. I didn't want anything from him. The only reason I had told him was because it was his right to know. But as far as I was concerned, I wanted absolutely nothing to do with him ever again. The only thing I expected from him was to fulfill his legal obligations, child support, nothing more. He could try to run from his responsibilities, but I wasn't going to let him off that easy. Of course, he tried to argue. He always has to have the last word. But I didn't give him the satisfaction. I turned and walked away. Later, I broke the news to his parents. I felt they had the right to know, and their reaction was immediate. Within hours, they were at my parents' house, assuring me that they would support me no matter what. They were furious with Warren, disgusted by his behavior, and made it clear that if he refused to take responsibility for his child, they would make sure the baby was well taken care of. In fact, they were so enraged by his actions that they told me they planned to change their inheritance plans. They said that if Warren chose to abandon his responsibilities, they would ensure a portion of the inheritance went directly to the baby, bypassing him completely. They warned that if he stayed with Mallory, if he truly wanted to throw his life away for her, he wouldn't see a single penny. And then, as if on cue, I got a message from Mallory. She apologized again, saying she hated herself for destroying my family. She said that after finding out I was pregnant, she had decided to leave Warren for good. That she would never show her face to me again. That all she wished for was for my baby to grow up happy. I didn't even bother replying. And now, as if all of this wasn't absurd enough, Warren's behavior has completely shifted. After weeks of cruelty, after accusing me of trapping him, after wishing harm on our child, he suddenly wants another chance. Of course, he has no idea about his parents' plans for the inheritance. That's not what's driving him. No, what's driving him is the fact that his entire world is falling apart. Mallory has left him. His family has turned their backs on him. Even our colleagues at the hospital have distanced themselves. The once confident, arrogant man who thought he could get away with anything is now finding himself alone and humiliated, forced to face the consequences of his own actions. And now, suddenly, he wants to be in my life again. He's tried to frame it like he cares, like he just wants to create a stable environment for the baby. But I see right through him. So when he had the audacity to demand that we get back together, I laughed in his face. And then I told him, in no uncertain terms, that I was never going back. Of course, Warren didn't take my rejection well. True to form, he immediately turned it around on me, twisting the narrative to make me the villain. He called me a terrible mother, accusing me of ruining our child's life just because I refused to play happy family with him now that his world had collapsed. He even had the audacity to claim that one day, he'd make sure our child hated me for breaking up our family by divorcing him. Update 1. Since so many people have asked about my relationship with Mallory, wondering what kind of dynamic we had that might explain why she did this to me, I'll clarify. The truth is, we had a completely normal sibling relationship. There was no favoritism in our family, neither of us was the golden child. Our parents loved us equally, and we never had any major fights or deep-seated jealousy between us. I always loved my sister, through everything. Which is why her betrayal hurts more than I can even put into words. I am glad she left Warren after finding out I was pregnant. I mean, that man really had the audacity to throw away our marriage, convinced he could replace me with a younger version of myself. But too bad for him, he lost her too. That doesn't mean I'll ever forgive Mallory. But at least, for once, Warren is truly alone. Update 2. Warren decided to show up at my parents' house to fix things. At first, he tried the same tired script, telling me we should get back together, insisting that sometimes, parents have to make sacrifices for the sake of their children. He went on about how our baby deserved to grow up with both parents instead of just one. I was so tired of hearing this nonsense. I reminded him, in no uncertain terms, that not too long ago, he didn't even want this baby. He had literally wished for me to miscarry. And now, suddenly, he was preaching about the importance of family? About sacrifice? When I threw that in his face, he tried to backtrack. He mumbled something about how maybe once he held the baby, his feelings would change. But his words were hollow, just like every empty promise he had ever made. I looked him straight in the eye and told him what I had told him before: you slept with my sister. There is zero chance of us ever getting back together. No amount of pleading, guilt-tripping, or manipulation is going to change that. That's when his usual arrogance flared up again. Instead of taking responsibility, he turned it around on me. He blamed me for his affair. According to him, I had stopped showing him affection for months. I was too busy with work. He claimed he had expected me to slow down my career after we got married, but I never did. I actually laughed out loud at how pathetic it was. This was classic Warren, shifting the blame, rewriting history to make himself the victim. He knew exactly who I was before we got married. We had been co-workers for years before we became a couple. He had seen firsthand how dedicated I was to my career. And back then, he had loved it. In fact, it was one of the things we bonded over, our shared drive to succeed in medicine. Now, all of a sudden, it was a problem? I made it clear to him, I was never going to apologize for working hard, especially when he had been doing the exact same thing for years. I wasn't the problem. He was. That's when he started whining about Mallory. He had the nerve to say she was there for him when he was feeling vulnerable. That he had been so lonely, and it was somehow my fault for not noticing that he had been cheating on me for months. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. It was as if he actually expected me to feel guilty for not catching him in the act sooner, as if that would somehow make what he did more acceptable. At that point, I had enough. I told him, flat out, to stop blaming me for his choices. He was the one who made the decision to betray me. He was the one who destroyed our marriage. And even his own parents knew it, that's why they had taken my side. Warren scoffed, rolling his eyes, and arrogantly claimed that his parents would forgive him. That no matter what, they would always love him and take him back. That's when I finally dropped the truth on him. I told him that his parents were done with him. That they had already decided to cut him off from his inheritance. Not only that, but all that money? It was going straight to our baby. For the first time since this entire ordeal began, Warren was speechless. I watched as his face crumbled, his usual smugness vanishing in an instant. He was actually shaken for the first time, realizing that he had truly lost everything. And I won't lie. I did feel a certain satisfaction watching it sink in. After everything he had put me through, seeing him finally face some real consequences was a small but significant moment of justice. Then, the tantrum began. He started screaming at me, calling me vile and disgusting, ranting about how I had ruined his life. He even spat out that he wished he had cheated on me sooner. I just shook my head. He was a pathetic, broken man, and I wanted nothing more to do with him. I told him to leave. But he didn't. Instead, he stepped aggressively close to me, still shouting, his presence making me deeply uncomfortable. That's when my parents, who had been trying to give us privacy but had been listening from the other room, came rushing in. The second my dad saw Warren towering over me, his face inches from mine while I cowered back, something snapped. In an instant, my dad rushed forward, grabbed Warren, and punched him square in the face. Warren staggered, disoriented. He barely had time to react before my dad grabbed him by the collar, dragged him to the door, and threw him out of the house. I stood there, watching as my dad, seething with rage, warned him that if he ever showed his face here again, it would be the last thing he ever did. Since that night, I haven't heard a word from Warren. No calls. No texts. Nothing. I guess he finally realized he had nothing left to say. And honestly, the silence has been the most peaceful thing I've experienced in a long time. I'm so grateful to my dad for standing up for me, and I cannot wait to finalize this divorce and close this chapter of my life forever. Update 3. It's been 8 months since my last update. I wanted to check in for those who have been following my story. I gave birth to a beautiful baby girl, and she's doing wonderfully. Warren's parents have set up a trust fund for her, and they continue to visit me regularly. They've completely cut Warren out of their lives, he's no longer a part of the family. The divorce? Finalized. I have full custody of my daughter, and Warren's only obligation is paying child support. He didn't even fight me during the proceedings. In fact, he ended up paying a hefty amount in alimony because of his affair. As for Mallory, she still sends me messages from time to time. But for the most part, she's stayed away, which is the greatest gift she could have ever given me. I don't think she and Warren will ever get back together. But honestly, I don't care. I'm focused on my daughter, on my career, and on building a good life for the two of us. That's all that matters now.